Freemasons generally tend to take a low-key approach to most matters, but not in February of this year when the United Grand Lodge of England came out fighting. The final straw appeared to be a series of news stories in the media questioning the influence of Freemasons in the United Kingdom police and in their parliament. The lodge said, to quote, that the ongoing gross misrepresentation of its 200,000 plus members is discrimination, pure and simple. Our members should not have to feel undeservedly stigmatised, and no other organisation would stand for this, and nor shall we. The Chief Executive, Dr. David Staples, said he had written to the UK Equality and Human Rights Commission, and to back this they took a full-page advert in the Times, the Daily Telegraph and the Guardian with the message "Enough is enough," and these adverts sparked a huge reaction on social media. A spokesman for the United Grand Lodge of England said that many of its members refused to disclose their membership for what it might mean. And he went on to say that the classic thing is that people fear what they don't understand and often will fill in the blanks. It's very much our mission now to be more open, but when this discrimination exists, it's very difficult to do. Well, Freemasonry in the island can be traced back to 1765 when the first lodge met in Douglas, so it's been part of Manx life for a long time, and it didn't always keep a low profile. But one person who's not so inhibited is the Provincial Grand Master of the Isle of Man, and recently he appeared on Mandate to explain the Enough is Enough campaign. And that created a vigorous response. So he's with me again as our studio guest in today's programme to talk more about the history, ceremonies, principles, charitable work of the Manx Freemasons, and later at 1:15 he'll be on the Manning line to answer your questions. We welcome Keith Dalrymple. Well, I called you Keith Dalgleish before. Keith, do you ever play football?
Not as well as Kenny Dalgleish did, no.
Right.
No.
Well, anyway, thank you for joining us today. There's a whole series of things, really, I suppose, that we need to look at. And I know many people listening will know immediately the answer to this question, but for the benefit of those who may not know, could you tell us in a fairly simple terms, what is Freemasonry?
I can, because I'm a simple man. I only use simple terms. But firstly, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity, Roger. And thank you to the listeners, should there be any out there. I hope you're enjoying Mother's Day, especially the mums. Yeah. Freemasonry, we describe it in our formal, somewhat archaic language as the world's oldest fraternal, non-political, non-religious organisation. In the parlance of today, it's a male club, pure and simple.
Mm-hmm. But it teaches lessons, I presume. I mean, the whole purpose of the club is some sort of philosophy and teaching.
Yeah, the reason that Masonry has flourished over centuries is because it taps into something within men. It calls upon men to take a long, hard look at themselves, to address the mere fact that, as men, we're sons of Adam, therefore fallible. We don't profess to be perfect. In fact, we don't profess any more than the average principles, but we do, by accepting that we are fallible, that we're less than perfect, seek to address those matters within ourselves that by self-education, by self-awareness, we can improve.
Right. So how and when did Freemasonry start? I gave a date for the Isle of Man, but it was going a bit before then, wasn't it?
A little before then. For many years, we dated our origins from the earliest documented evidence we have. Our governing body is the United Grand Lodge of England, and they are very circumspect about statements that they'll make. They deal purely in facts. What is a matter of record? And I suppose it's for that reason that they've chosen to challenge the inaccuracies, the factual inaccuracies in certain pronouncements. Documented fact we had was that in 1646, a gentleman antiquarian by the name of Elias Ashmole was initiated in a lodge in Warrington. 1646, in the midst of the English Civil War. We subsequently now have documents that report the initiation into a lodge of Lord Murray up on the Scots borders in 1592. So yes, we have been around for quite a while.
And it survived all this time, but I presume there must have been some change. I mean, it has the philosophy, the rituals, we'll come to that later, but have they changed, or as time goes by and the centuries go by, has the whole thing changed to keep up with modern times?
We've been slow to change, and especially on the Isle of Man. Well, we're Manx, and we don't welcome change, and certainly within Freemasonry, we don't like change for change's sake, but we have developed and evolved. You make reference to the history, Roger. Well, over 4 centuries or more, the modes of dress, the modes of address will have changed. Yeah. So we've evolved, but we have never slavishly followed fashion.
Right. Well, of course, I'm not a Freemason, but my father was. And
there's still time for you, Roger.
Thank you very much. One would wonder at my age, but there we are.
Yeah. I'm glad you clarified that, because I'd hate any of your listeners to think that there's a collusion here between you and I.
No, my father, I've frequently told the tale that probably why I'm not a Freemason, because at a certain age he said to me, "You're probably now at an age to join the Freemasons." And I said to him, "Well, what is it? What am I joining, Dad?" And he said, "Well, you'll find out when you get in." So I said, "Well, you told me never to sign a blank cheque, so I didn't. Maybe I should have done. I don't know." But the fact was then at that particular time, we are now talking going back a few years, but at that time, my father was very, very cagey about telling us anything about it.
Not surprisingly, and that persisted for a long while. On occasions such as this, I've waxed lyrical, probably bored people with my take on the reason for this clandestine attitude that persisted within Freemasonry. Not for a great deal of time, but from the 1930s and through the Second World War and afterwards, arising from the persecution of Freemasons. Mm. I don't want to bore your listeners with the tale again, unless they particularly want to know about somewhere in the region of 250,000 German Freemasons being carted off to concentration camps by Hitler's army, never to be seen again. Similar things happening in Italy. And in the streets of neutral Spain, people were shot down merely because they were suspected of being Freemasons.
What happened in the only territories that were occupied, British territories that were occupied by the Germans, that is the Channel Islands?
What happened, one of the first actions of the German army when they invaded the Channel Islands was they literally sacked the Masonic Hall in St Helier in Jersey. And they took away the records. What they were interested in was to find out the names and the home addresses of Freemasons. It was at that time that things were not going too well for the Allies, were they? And it was quite reasonable to assume that the next logical step would be that the Nazi army would be on the British mainland. And it's at that point that the message went out from our Grand Lodge in London: heads down, boys, heads down. The Nazis are coming.
The message doesn't seem to have gone out for a long time that the war was over.
I don't think anybody bothered to tell Grand Lodge in 1945 that he's not coming now. The resistance to change, you see, by custom and practice, heads go down, we become secretive in our ways, but it's taken this long because for a little while people were not comfortable. There were other things happening in the world, and it wasn't just fascism that didn't like Freemasonry. We were a prescribed order under communism also. So what happened in fascist states similarly happened in the USSR.
And of course, maybe we should dwell shortly on why this occurs. I mean, well, it's happened all over the place. There is this hostility that's grown up, not just uniquely British comment, but, as you say, worldwide in places. Now, coming back to the, we maybe deal with that in a minute, but coming back to this campaign, which I would call, that you've launched from London, Enough is Enough. I find that it is interesting that they talk about stigmatisation, and they talk about discrimination, and as you heard me say in the introduction, taking a fairly strong attack on that. I thought the comment from Labour MP Melanie Onset was quite interesting. She said, how can members be discriminated against if we don't know who they are?
There's a real dichotomy there, isn't there?
Yeah.
We saw articles and we hear allegations that people's progression in various organisations has been thwarted by Freemasons. I was not promoted, and it was Freemasons in that organisation that prevented it. Yet we don't know who those Freemasons are. But we know the people who thwarted my promotion were Freemasons. What? The two things don't hold together, do they?
Not unless you know who the people are.
Precisely. And you know, not knowing who Freemasons are, I'll give you a little quotation. In the reign of George III, the Unlawful Societies Act was passed, 1799, making it unlawful to take certain oaths. However, Freemasons were specifically exempted from the terms of the Act on the express provision that the secretary of each lodge each year gave the meeting place, names and occupations of every lodge member to the clerk to the local justices. What the clerks did with these lists is lost in the mysteries of time. The legislation stayed in place and was strictly observed until 1967, when it was repealed in the Criminal Law Act of 1967. Therefore, it's only during the past 51 years, that's what I'm quoting from an earlier statement, that lodge memberships have become secret. But specifically on the Isle of Man, how secret? It's been our custom and practice to give a copy of our annual Masonic directory, in which details of the lodges, the membership, the names of the secretaries of the lodges are published, to Douglas Town Hall, to be exhibited in the library. And I want to make it my business to ensure that that process continues.
Well, there is, we come maybe to the next point, when we talk about this campaign, which you called Enough is Enough, and some of that was based on a report in The Guardian from the former Police Federation chairman in the UK, Steve White, who said he was concerned Freemasons, and this comes to the point you made, were blocking the progress of women and members of ethnic minorities. And he said it was not necessarily a good idea that a police officer would be a Freemason at the same time. Now, I mean, do you find, or is there anything, would you say, in this organisation that means that perhaps it's a little unwise to take certain types of position?
No, I don't think that there's any incompatibility whatsoever. And I recall a similar question being put to one of my predecessors, Deemster Henry Callow, who said that under no circumstances had he ever allowed his membership of Freemasonry to in any way influence the process, due process of law, his judgment as a Deemster. In fact, he believed that it made him a more tolerant, a more understanding person, more willing to take cognizance of the circumstances of others.
He's one of a number of Deemsters who were Freemasons, actually, from Roy Easton to others.
Indeed, indeed. The law has been heavily represented in Freemasonry under UGLE. Freemasons and civil servants. Perhaps that's what gave us the structure and definition.
Right. Now, coming on to this newspaper advertising, are you aware of any reaction to it yet?
The reaction within the membership has been positive. The reaction within journalistic circles has also been positive. Both The Guardian and the Daily Mirror published retractions and apologised for the misrepresentation and the inaccuracies in the articles that they'd published.
But one sort of unit that's missing still here, isn't it? Because they talk about all sorts of suggestions of collusion and suggestions of favouritism, but they also focused in on what they kept on talking about, a secret society.
Yes.
And that part of it, of course, hasn't been answered yet. Yeah. So I suppose I have to ask you, why are you a secret society?
Well, and I have to reply, we are not. We form Masonic halls on the Isle of Man. You probably know all of them. But the general public know where they are too, because they all have one thing in common. They all bear the legend, Freemasons' Hall or Masonic Hall, and the symbol of Freemasonry, the square and compasses. So hardly secretive. And the point that I've just made about the issue of our directory with our names. We're not a secret society. We've never sought to conceal our existence. What we do is we exercise the privilege that any club or society has to conduct our activities within the club in confidence. But I'm here to answer questions quite candidly. I'm not here as an apologist for Freemasonry, and I'm not here to defend.
Well, as you appreciate, in a programme like this, it is probably my function to try and ask the questions that the listeners would like to ask if they were here. Although I hope some of them will join us on the Manning Line at 1:15, and they can ask the questions themselves. But that's to come yet. But let me say to you then this continual air, this continual impression of secrecy, there must be a good reason for that.
A throwback to the times that I alluded to, the 1930s, the persecution of Freemasonry. May I say that possibly once it had become the norm within Freemasonry, perhaps the members were then conscious that their membership was being held against them within their profession, within their place of employment. Perhaps they also enjoyed the fact that their lodge was somewhere that they went quietly, enjoyed the fellowship of like-minded individuals, had a convivial meal, and perhaps a drink or two.
Well, you say it's not a secret society, but I have heard Freemasons talk about Freemasonry secrets. Mm-hmm. I've heard that a number of times. What are they?
The secrets of Freemasonry. Secrets of Freemasonry are those things that we endeavour to uncover about ourselves, revealing ourselves initially to ourselves, acknowledging our own weakness.
By a ritual?
The ritual is the manner in which we portrayed our principles. We go back again, but let's not go back to 1592, but to 1646, the English Civil War. At that time, we were entering what became the Age of Enlightenment, English Civil War, a nation totally divided, basically on the grounds of religion. And Freemasonry is an organisation which is and always has been at the forefront of the ecumenical movement. It's an organisation that welcomes men of all religions, but not men of none. So men of all faiths, all sectors of Christianity, Muslims, Buddhists, all are welcome as long as you have an avowed belief in a single deity.
So you're saying you're not a religion?
We are not a religion.
Are you a rival to a religion?
We're not a rival, we're not a substitute for a religion. Oh.
Well, let's come back to the secret side of it for a moment. Whether it's secret or confidential is a choice in words, I suppose you could say. But isn't ritual, when you think about it today with all the changes in our society, which we discussed a little earlier, isn't ritual becoming out of place?
I don't think it is out of place, because the ritual gives us structure and system, whatever that be. The ritual of the opening of Parliament, the ritual of Tynwald, they all have a place. Now, we chose that we would adopt the custom and practice of the ancient operative masons, the stonemasons, the men who built the cathedrals, the great houses of Europe, men who risked their lives up rickety scaffold, building to earn a living, but building to the greater glory of their God. Now, one of the things that we are able to admire 1,000 years later is the workmanship of those operative stonemasons. And using the ritual practices as we believe them to be, we are aware that operative stonemasonry did confer secrets upon its members. Because back in the day, the construction of York Minster, Chartres Cathedral, the operative stonemason had abilities that were not popular, not widely known in the community. The ability to set out a right angle, literally to set out the foundation of a building. The ability to go into a quarry and select the ideal piece of stone that could be dressed to form ashlars or the more elaborate elements of a building. Those stonemasons were trained throughout an apprenticeship, and during their apprenticeship, as they progressed, as their proficiency increased, they were given the opportunity, because the building of York Minster, for example, well, was it 78 years and it still wasn't completed? There would be a lot of masons engaged, and they were itinerant and would travel. The secrets that they were given were the modes of recognition, that they could sell their labour to another master mason. They could seek employment. As most of them would be semi-literate at best, they couldn't be given a diploma or a certificate as we now have for an apprentice. What they were given was a sign or token, something that they could take to the next prospective employer to demonstrate that they were proficient to a certain level. After all, you're a master mason, Roger. You've landed this large contract to build a great house. You need more hands on site. What are you going to do to find out how good they are? Are you going to entrust them up that rickety scaffold with this very expensive stone to risk their lives and others? Or are you going to ask them how they can demonstrate the level of proficiency?
I can see that making some considerable sense at the time that you're talking about. But how does that philosophy carry us into the 21st century?
It's very similar to anything that enjoys and celebrates tradition. We've carried that forward because we believe that it's relevant today. We believe that it's relevant, and I'll give you a personal experience. I talked to people I'm a chartered building surveyor, so I have an interest in the practical side of construction. I've talked to the Clerk of Works at Liverpool Anglican Cathedral. I've talked to the Clerk of Works at York Minster. I've been on the roofs of both buildings. And I talked to a man who undertook some repair at Salisbury Cathedral. And he went up the spire, a huge spire. And what they all said at some point in the discussions was, it was amazing. The workmanship on the spire of Salisbury Cathedral was exemplary, the quality of workmanship. And the man that produced it knew it was never going to be seen by human eyes again, until somebody went up by some means. But he did it because it was being seen. As far as our teachings go, it was being seen by what we refer to as the all-seeing eye, that everything that man does is witnessed by his God.
Why do you call God the great architect then?
We do not want to offend any religion. So, if we are to welcome men of different religions into our lodges, into membership, then we refer to him as the great architect. That greater force, that
Well, is it true then, if I take it this way, that first of all, you take oaths, I understand,
That's
when
right.
you join the
Yes.
and there are obligations attached to those oaths, yes. Yet, as far as I can gather, you still have some, at least on your, as it were, statute, you still have some pretty hideous penalties if people don't live up to those obligations.
We did. We don't any longer.
Okay.
We don't. And I doubt that there's ever been an instance of any of these penalties being carried out. I doubt it very much. But again, you think of our antiquity, and the language that is used in the ritual of Freemasonry is the language of antiquity. The most readily available book in Europe would have been, of course, the Bible.
Mm-hmm. And you don't
The
call it
Christian
the Bible,
Bible.
do you?
We don't. No. It's we have a volume of sacred law, and depend upon the religion of the members attending, it will be the volume of of law sacred to that particular faith.
Mm-hmm.
I attended a lodge in London, a lodge of research. There were 7 volumes open, which included the Bible, the Quran, and the sacred volumes of 7 different religions. I found it very moving that I was in a lodge room with Jews and Muslims at the same time as Christians who were Anglican, Catholic, Methodist, and we met as Freemasons.
So why is it that some churches, then, if that is the case, if you're so wide-ranging, some churches don't like Freemasonry? The Roman Catholic has never been very keen on it.
No, it hasn't. Again, antiquity. Rome has been particularly wary of any organisation that could threaten to undermine Rome itself. After all, we both go back a long, long way, Freemasonry and the Church of Rome. There are Anglican people, Anglican ministers similarly, and Methodists. I suppose it's because the majority of fundamental religious people believe there's only one route. There's only one way, and it's my way. And whilst the ecumenical route has now been adopted by so many of the Orthodox religions, they join together for major services, the fact that we were doing it first, perhaps there's a little resentment.
Mm-hmm. Now, go back to these oaths, part of it. How far do these oaths go into looking after each other and looking after the members?
Looking after each other. In every walk of life, there will be people who from time to time are in need of assistance, of help, in every walk of life. And that's true of Freemasonry. Who should help those people? Who should help Freemasons and their families and dependents when in need? Should it be left to, as we talk today, the state? Or should it be, as happened in the 1600s, benevolent societies were formed? Self-help groups, we would now call them. We still have one, the Andrus Benevolent Society, who march regularly on the Isle of Man, founded on similar origins. So we say, yes, Freemasons will help other Freemasons and their families when help is needed. But we do that by making money available, making donations to those wider organisations who serve the whole community.
And this is the charitable work. We haven't got round to that.
Yes.
Is it?
Yes. But, you know...
let me just say that I know you distribute quite a lot of money to charity. Where does that money come from?
It comes from the pockets of Freemasons and their families. We don't collect from the general public. We don't have flag days. Every penny comes from Freemasons and their families.
Now, I touched on there about Freemasons looking after each other. You talked about it in the sense of the support that used to be before the state took over in so many ways. But one of the problems, one of the accusations in a lot of these articles, which you've taken exception to, says that Freemasons are expected to prefer fellow Masons at the expense of others in giving jobs, promotions, contracts and the like.
An absolute nonsense. An absolute nonsense. And I have to say, had that been the case, I've been a Freemason for 47 years. I'm still eking out a living as a freelance surveyor. I would be happily retired with my yacht in the Mediterranean if there'd been preferment for business opportunities. It's an absolute nonsense.
Okay, well, let's at this point take a short commercial break and join us again in just about 3 minutes. Keith Dalrymple is the Provincial Grand Master of the Freemasons in the Isle of Man, and he's our studio guest on today's Sunday Opinion. And we've been discussing the history and some of the rituals and the public perception in particular, and the charity work of the Masons and their place in Manx society. Now, at this stage, I should remind you that we'll both be back for the Man in Line, that's Manx Radio's Sunday phone-in programme at 1:15 today. This will be your opportunity to join in the discussion and question Mr. Dalrymple about any aspect of Freemasonry by telephoning 66 1368 from 1:15. You may also text to 166177 or email to studio@manxradio.com, and both these services are open now. Well, Keith, coming back to where we broke off when we went to the break there, the perceptions that we were talking about, another one, of course, is that the Freemasons serve as a political pressure group.
Starting point for that is that there are two topics which are banned from discussion in our lodges: religion and politics. Very, very difficult to avoid discussion about those two. And if I had my way, I'd add a third. I'd add football, because that's equally divisive from time to time. Mm. But we will not have that discussion, and there is no point in me even suggesting that we don't have, amongst our numbers, Freemasons who are or have been politicians. And there have been some very, very significant politicians. I'm thinking of Winston Churchill, who was a Freemason. Mm. But he was also a member of the Society of Druids, whatever that is, and whatever it is.
Did that serve has his religious qualification?
I never had the opportunity to ask him, unfortunately. I would have loved to have met him, yes.
You'd say in it that somebody has to have some sort of religion, somebody has to have a belief in a divine being, or whatever word you like to use. But what happens where there's a lot of good people out there who are agnostic, who are not absolutely sure? Is the organisation not missing out by losing their talents?
The organisation is missing out, and I can point to two individuals in particular. I have a very good friend, a friend of 40-odd years standing or more, whose family have strong Masonic connections. I would dearly love him to be a member of my lodge. He'd be a great asset. But he is agnostic, and he has said that he wouldn't in any way embarrass me, Freemasonry, by telling lies, but he couldn't acknowledge a belief in a supreme being. There's a young man that I do quite a bit of work with at this moment. Similarly, very, very supportive of Freemasonry's ideals, but says that he does not have a religious faith. I admire and respect those two individuals, but if Freemasonry is to have anything, it has to stand by its principles. It cannot merely water principles down in pursuit of popularity.
But sometimes even principles, basic principles, stay the same from generation to generation. But sometimes principles are based on the current culture at the time, and the culture changes.
Absolutely, yes, the culture changes. But if we were to say that it's acceptable within Freemasonry for our members to consider themselves the centre of their own universe, a basic idea that there is nothing more influential, nothing more powerful than me as an individual. I can't accept that, And I don't know how we would persuade our members to continue with their benevolent and charitable activities if the focus is on oneself, if you put yourself at the centre of your universe.
Well, in this 21st century, there's a huge amount of debate going at the moment about equality for women, whether it's in pay, whether it's in position, whether it was the glass ceiling, whatever. There is a discussion, and probably fairly right, correct one, that women should be paid the same, should be treated the same, especially if they're doing the same job. There should be an equality. But in Freemasons, there isn't.
I agree with the sentiment that there should be equality. I agree that our attitude in society towards women has been questionable, to say the least, especially the women that we honour and celebrate today, the mothers. But you know, over this weekend, you probably saw that there have been two rugby tournaments, 2 Six Nations, a men's tournament and a women's tournament. And in Freemasonry, we have male Freemasonry and there's female Freemasonry. There are Lady Masons who meet and enjoy the company of other Lady Masons here on the Isle of Man.
And is the rituals and everything the same?
They tell me that they are, but I've never been to a Lady Mason's lodge, so I couldn't comment. But they say they are, probably taken directly from ours because we've been around a little longer.
Well, in both cases then, maybe I should ask this question, because this is one that I think causes a lot of head scratching in the public, and that's, why do you wear regalia, basically the pinnies?
It's a nod to the ancient forebears, the Freemasons, the stonemasons, who wore an apron to protect their clothing. They probably only had one suit of clothes or one pair of trousers, whatever. We borrowed titles from established religions. We borrowed customs and practice from the court. When nobility, wealthy men, decided to associate with those horny-handed sons of toil, the stonemasons, there had to be something, like common ground for the two. And I suppose the nobility were used to the ways of court and court dress. And they liked to display their wealth, their influence. I don't know how we evolved to wear the regalia that we do, and it differs around the world, but it's all on the same basic theme. It's a badge. It's something that we're proud of. And because we are hierarchical, a progressive science as we describe it, it lets each of us know where we are within that organisation.
Right. Well, maybe we'll come to that later, because on the man in line you might get some more questions on that. However, this of course comes down to basics. How much does it cost to be a Freemason?
That varies from lodge to lodge, from the place of meeting, the frequency of meeting. I'm not a golfer, but my friends who are golfers tell me that my subscription to a Masonic lodge is a lot less than the cost of being a Freemason. However, beyond paying your basic subscription, as we've discussed, there are charitable donations, freely and voluntarily given. So there are very few occasions when there isn't somebody coming along saying, "Thank you, brother, put your hand in your pocket because we're raising money for this or for that."
But those donations, effectively, they're a secret donation, are they? I mean, it's entirely up to the individual how much he puts in an envelope, is it?
It's entirely up to the individual.
Others will not know.
No, but it depends on where you are and what you're doing, but in certain lodges, it's very much like being in a church. A collecting plate comes around.
So what are the qualifications for membership?
We started by saying that you would be of full age, and that was 21 years, until the age of majority was reduced to 18. So you must, in normal circumstances, be 21 years of age, male, and on special occasions I'm empowered to issue a dispensation for somebody below the age of 21. It happened on the Isle of Man, firstly, when 3 young men were going off to war, First World War, and they were all under the age of 21, and the Provincial Grand Master at the time issued a dispensation here. You must also be a free man. Now, that may seem nonsense, but Freemasonry in the 1600s would not introduce a member who was a bondsman, who had a commitment to his lord, whoever that might be. So you were a bondsman, that's where your loyalty lie. You a slave couldn't be admitted to a free Mason's lodge.
So if you satisfy the qualifications, how do you get to join?
It's onerous, because we also want to know something about an individual's background, about his habits, about his family, about his wife, if should he have one, or partners, attitude towards Freemasonry. We also want to know that we're not admitting people who've already demonstrated that they have questionable pursuits, such as people with a criminal record. Now, we know that we've said all men are fallible. We try to wean people from their fallibility, but it's not a good starting point to say that we're going to admit people with criminal records, with people who are disputatious. We use this word. In your clubs and societies, whatever they may be, Roger, there'll always be 1 or 2 individuals who make life less than pleasant for the rest. There always will be in any group of individuals. Well, we're trying to be selective and make sure that we don't introduce disputatious people.
Right, well, now we're coming right to the end of this edition of Sunday Opinion. And as you may have gathered, our topic for discussion today has been Freemasonry. And our studio guest has been the senior Freemason in the island, the Provincial Grand Master Keith Dalrymple. Now, after his recent appearance on Mandate, the morning news programme, we had a number of requests that we should invite him back to take questions from the public, and that's why he's here today. Now, your opportunity to talk to him is next, after the news, the weather and the sport, when you can ask questions or discuss any aspects of Freemasonry, and he'll be back then with me to talk to you on the Man in Line, Manx Radio's Sunday phone-in programme. And I gather you're bringing a guest with you, Keith. Who will that be?
The Deputy Provincial Grand Master, representing the younger face of Freemasonry, certainly a lot younger than mine, Roger Southern.
Right, well, we look forward to both of you then. So remember, your opportunity to talk to both of them is next, after the news, weather and sport, when you can ask questions or discuss any aspect of Freemasonry. And they'll be back with me to talk to you on the Man in Line, Manx Radio's Sunday phone-in programme. Telephone us on 66 1368. The line's open at 1:15. You may also text to 166177 or email to studio@manxradio.com. Both these services are open now. The programme was produced by Catherine Nichol. I'm Roger Watterson, and we all look forward to your company at 1:15.